outside of the front rank there. Richie Ginther with the V12 Honda, the Japanese car, which has equaled Jim Clark's time. So once again, we have the Japanese car on the front rank of the grid, as we did at Silverstone, but there's only one running. Ronnie Buckman has been suspended from the Japanese team. The hope is that they will have the other car in sufficiently good nick for Phil Hill to drive it at the Nürburgring the next round in the championship. On the second rank there, John Surtees, same time, 1:31 with the 12-cylinder Ferrari. Next to him, Dan Gurney with the Coventry Climax powered Brabham, 1:31.2. Hello, that's Colin Chapman. That's Colin Chapman. Isn't it extraordinary the number of times that we have seen this at Zandvoort? Such a pleasant country, and yet they will persist in arresting British drivers or officials. It really is most remarkable. I suppose Colin Chapman didn't have the right pass on, but there we are, an unfortunate incident involving Colin Chapman. Let's hope it isn't an omen for Lotus. On the third rank, Jackie Stewart with the second BRM, 1:31.4. Next to Denny Hume's Brabham, 1:32. And on the outside of the third rank, Mike Spence with the second of the Lotuses, 1:32.2. Then comes Bruce McLaren with the Cooper, 1:32.6. Joe Siffert with Rob Walker's BRM powered Brabham, 1:32.9. Then Frank Gardner with the Wilmot Brabham, Lorenzo Bandini with the V8 Ferrari, Innes Ireland with the Reg Parnell Lotus BRM, and then on the next rank, Jochen Rindt with the second of the Coopers, 1:33.7. Joe Bonnier with the second of the Rob Walker cars, the Brabham Climax powered, and then on the rear rank, Bob Anderson with his privately entered Brabham Climax. Bob Anderson having been honored by the Grand Prix Drivers Association last night by being presented with the trophy for the best private driver, and alongside him Richard Atwood on the Lotus BRM. And now they're rolling forward from the dummy grid with 30 seconds to go, and the dummy grid, as you can see, is rather further back from the pucker grid than is contemporary practice. So there's the white car on the outside, Richie Ginther with the Honda, Jim Clark in the center with the Lotus, and Graham Hill with the BRM on the inside. And of course the big question is, can Jim Clark pull it off again and keep his unbroken record in the championship events in which he has driven this year? He has 36 points against Graham Hill's 23, and Jackie Stewart is third with 19, Surtees fourth with 17 on the championship table. 80 laps to the checkered flag, 209 miles. And there's Graham Hill on the inside, Jim Clark in the center, Richie Ginther with the Honda, and then behind car number 16, Dan Gurney alongside John Surtees. Look at the Honda. Richie Ginther with the Honda leads down towards the Tarzan hairpin, but it's Graham Hill on the inside there and Jim Clark in the center, but it's Richie Ginther with the Honda in the lead from the flag. And it's Graham Hill working into second place, Jim Clark third. As they come down towards the 70-mile-an-hour right-hander, it's Richie Ginther, Graham Hill, Jim Clark, Dan Gurney. And then Jackie Stewart quite well up on the second of the BRM. And it's still the Honda out in front ahead of the BRM and the Lotus. Richie Ginther, Graham Hill, Jim Clark, and then Jackie Stewart, as they go at 115 miles an hour through that blind right-hander up the hill, still accelerating, and now changing down to hold about 100 miles an hour through the long right-hander as the crowd gets back down into its seats. And now we wait for them on the series of S-bends which lead to the very fast section through the woods. I was talking to Frank Gardner and Innes Ireland about the circuit, and Frank Gardner says for his money this is where the circuit starts, this back part where it is imperative to get through with a minimum angle of drift, and it's still the Honda in the lead. And Graham Hill in second place, and yes, Jim Clark in third, and Jackie Stewart in fifth place there. Dan Gurney's ahead of Jackie Stewart, fourth. And it's still the Honda in the lead on the first lap of the Dutch Grand Prix, and here they come to the end of the first lap. And Graham Hill is pressing Richie Ginther on the braking distance as they go into Tarzan, and it's Graham Hill on the BRM challenging Richie Ginther, but Ginther holding the corner and Jim Clark closing up. These three well away, and it's still Richie Ginther in the Honda ahead of Graham Hill and Jim Clark. And then in fourth place, Jan Gurney, fifth, Jackie Stewart, then Mike Spence, John Surtees, Denny Hume, Bandini, Bruce McLaren, Jochen Rindt, Innes Ireland, Frank Gardner, Joe Bonnier, and Joe Sippert. That was the whole field, but it's still the Honda in the lead and pulling away slightly from Graham Hill's BRM and Jim Clark's Lotus. Now here you see car number 22 there, Richie Ginther, and car number 2 is John Surtees' Ferrari, and the pair of them are just lapping Dickie Atwood there as they go through the over 100-mile-an-hour curves that lead out into the country in the sand dunes. Here's the 160-mile-an-hour pit straight, and already the policemen are lining up towards the finish. I mean, as the finish approaches, and life is getting increasingly difficult for us as people stand up all around our commentary position on the pit's roof. Cars working up in groups. There's the leader, Jim Clark. The second of those two cars, Jim Clark in the Lotus. An 11-second lead now with 7 laps to go. And now we're looking down the straight for the second man up, Jackie Stewart in the BRM. That was Jim Clark passing us on the finishing line, and now once again, no, we won't go back to the finishing straight to look for the second man, Jackie Stewart. We're looking at the 55-mile-an-hour Tarzan hairpin with Jim Clark coming around, having just lapped Dickie Atwood for the second time. So there's Jim Clark in the leading Lotus, number 6, with, we might just get a glimpse of Dickie Atwood in, there he is, in the second of the Reg Parnell cars, lying, as I told you, 12th in a surviving field of 12 runners from the 17 who started in this 209-mile race. An estimated crowd of 60,000 here, and it's been an intensely interesting and exciting race, despite the fact that Jim Clark, as I told you, has led all the way from the 6th. There have been rare tussles behind him, with Graham Hill, who made the fastest lap in practice, gradually falling back from his lead immediately after he challenged and took it away from the Honda, gradually falling back, and now in 4th place, 18 seconds behind Dan Gurney's Brabham, with no hope whatsoever of doing anything about it. Whether the edge has gone off Graham Hill's PRM or whether he's having braking trouble, I'm not quite sure. There was no sign of any misfiring on the BRM, but the fact is it's fallen back despite Graham's very grim and determined efforts, as was evidenced by the angle of drift he was building up on these corners here, which we're looking at now. Meantime, Jim Clark has passed me here for the 75th time with 5 laps to go. I hope that was a policeman who ran across the road. If it was, even if it was a policeman, he ought to know better. That's Jim Clark. I rather fancy the leader of that group. No, that was Dan Gurney, in fact. That was Dan Gurney going through. And the other 2 cars immediately behind there must have been Mike Spence just ahead of Bandini. That's right, that's what that would have been, the position, the battle for 8th and 9th positions between the second of the Lotuses and the second of the Ferraris. Graham Hill passing me now, having just lapped Surtees and Ginther. So the field is well spread out, and I fancy that our Dutch producer is having rather serious camera trouble in view of the fact that he's hanging on to this delightful but nonetheless extremely empty piece of road. It is in fact the section immediately behind the pits going out into the country, all flat, these curves here where the cars accelerate way through 100, 110, 115, getting up to 120 when they go out of the bottom of the picture there. Car number 14 is Denny Hume, who is in 5th position, but too far behind Graham Hill to be able to challenge him. A long way, more than half a lap, but now on the pit straight here, that's Jackie Stewart in 2nd place. There's Denny Hume again. 5th position with the Brabham. Denny Hume, who you remember won the Tourist Trophy race and had some very fine victories indeed in Formula 2. Now the number 2 driver with the Brabham team. Jack Brabham himself once again denied a drive, as he was by mischance at Silverstone, as he was by policy at Clermont, And the maestro is now giving his cars to Dan Gurney, the American, and Denny Hulme, the New Zealander, when he is short. And I was talking to him last night, and Jack Brabham is really very, very short of engines now. They've only got 2 really good engines, and both of these are in use to considerable purpose by virtue of the fact that Dan Gurney is in 3rd place and Denny Hulme in 5th place. Dan Gurney, however, was in 2nd position after Graham Hill had fallen back and before Jackie Stewart took over 2nd position on the 32nd lap. So Dan Gurney had quite a run for it. There's Frank Gardner going through just ahead of the leader. Jim Clark lapping Frank Gardner now on the outside there in the Tarzan hairpin, which he goes through at about 55 miles an hour, having completed 77 of the 80 laps. So it's 7.8 miles to go to the checkered flag and another victory for the brilliant Clark. And if Jimmy can pull this one off, completing his record of having won all the world champion races in which he's competed this year. You remember he declined Monaco in preference for his victory at Indianapolis. And now if he wins this one, it will mean 5 victories with a total of 45 points in the World Championship. And since only the 5 best results count in the championship, this will mean that if Jim Clark can take this checkered flag, he will have scored a maximum and will be virtually certain of the World Championship, because the only man who could beat him then would be Graham Hill, who would have to win all 4 of the remaining races, the Nürburgring, Monza, that's the German and Italian Grand Prix, and then Watkins Glen, the United States, and Mexico City. If Graham could win all those, and Jimmy didn't finish in any of those, then Graham could beat him. But this, of course, is immensely improbable, and it looks very, very much as if Jim Clark in the Lotus is on his way to clinching the World Championship for the 2nd time, of course. There he goes, completing his 78th lap now, 2 to go, and you can see how far ahead he has got of Frank Gardner and the Wilmot-entered Brabham on that lap. And there is Jackie Stewart just passing me there. The interval still very nearly 10 seconds. And Jim Clark, of course, is perfectly well aware of that. He's been given his pit signal. He knows exactly what the form is. And another thing to remember about him is that he is on the 2nd string car, the interval precisely 10 seconds. I just clicked my stopwatch there. Jim Clark is on the 2nd of the works cars, the one which Mike Spence drove at Silverstone last week. His own number 1 car having blown up the 4-valve engine in practice. Still no change in the order behind him. 10 seconds behind Jim Clark, Jackie Stewart on the BRM, 5 seconds behind Stewart, Dan Gurney's Brabham, and then just over 20 seconds now, Graham Hill 4th on the 2nd of the BRMs, 5th Denny Hulme, and then the only bit of close racing we have at this time between Richie Ginther's Honda and John Surtees. But now everybody is standing up here, an estimated crowd of over 60,000, which must be nearly a record for Zandvoort, and there's Jim Clark on his way to another magnificently won victory, because he's proved beyond any question, as he did last week, that he is a complete master, whatever the circumstances. There he goes, completing his 79th lap, on his last lap now, into the Tarzan hairpin for the last time. There goes Jackie Stewart, the interval between them just under 10 seconds. In fact, Dan Gurney passes me in 3rd place, and then there'll be a long gap before Graham Hill comes up. I've clicked my watch on Jim Clark as he goes through the 70-mile-an-hour right-hander there, and I'm waiting for Jackie Stewart there. And no, he's got it down. Jackie Stewart's only 9 seconds behind that time. So Jackie Stewart is still making a desperate bid to close the gap, but he hasn't got the pressure on enough really to worry the Lotus driver. Graham Hill passing me now in 4th position as the leader goes out into the country, very nearly a half a lap behind. And here you get a panoramic effect of the circuit here in the sand dunes. A circuit built specifically for motor racing on bomb rubble shortly after the war. It's wooded, it's undulating slightly, and it's a splendid place for a motor race. 2.6 miles to the lap, and the really quick boys lapping at around 103 miles an hour. 160-mile-an-hour straight, and all the rest curving, as you see Jim Clark here now, curving his way with his usual meticulous accuracy, not to waste a second, a tenth of a second, a hundredth of a second, nor a foot. And here's the 160-mile-an-hour straight now, and Jim Clark takes the checkered flag to win the Dutch Grand Prix of 1965 and score a maximum in his World Championship effort this year. Jackie Stewart takes the checkered flag in a very fine second place. Dan Gurney third there. This at the end of 209 miles, remember, extremely close racing, and finishing a lap behind to put your minds at rest there. Richie Ginther, in fact, just held off John Surtees, although there was only a whisker between them, and now we're still waiting for Graham Hill to come up. Innes Ireland takes the checkered flag to finish in 10th position on a car which is a good, perhaps 20 bhp down. There's Graham Hill finishing in 4th place, and then Denny Hume will come up to take the checkered flag to finish in 5th place, and all the others will be one lap down. And we're still waiting for Bandini. There he is. Bandini comes in late. You saw him flash through the picture, and he has dropped back behind Mike Spence. So Mike Spence snatches 8th place from Bandini, and Bandini is 9th, having made a bit of a nonsense of it, I suspect, on the last lap, because he was just ahead of him the last time they went through here. So the two duels then, which still existed in terms of feet and inches on the road, as opposed to seconds, between Richie Ginther's Honda and John Surtees' 12-cylinder Ferrari, resolves itself in Ginther's favor, who finishes 6th, and the duel, literally in feet and inches, between Spence and Bandini goes to the Lotus driver by a surprisingly handsome margin on the very last lap. In the meantime, here's Jim Clark now, going around on his tour of honor, and honor's the right word. A magnificent performance on a second-string car, in which he must have realized that if he was going to pull it off, he would really have to work. He worked, he wasn't flurried by the fact that it was the Honda in the lead for the first 2 laps, although that came as something of a surprise to us, not all that of a surprise, because the car was 3rd fastest in practice with Richie Ginther at the wheel, and they're beginning to get it right. But it succumbed first to the challenge of Graham Hill, and then Graham was once again forced to look at the rear end of Jim Clark's Lotus. Well, now the usual scenes of rejoicing and festivity, and the slightly unpleasant taste of that incident between Colin Chapman and some of the local constabulary right at the start is duly washed away by the sweet taste of victory, and in a moment or two the sweet taste of champagne. There's Colin Chapman, all smiles. Well, pictures which need absolutely no comment whatsoever. Oh, and now you hear the crowd cheering, not for the victor, but because a couple of the mounted policemen, which are very much a part of the scene here at Zandvoort, have gone off down the circuit at full gallop because there's some people climbing over the fences. Jim Clark then, in his moment of victory at Zandvoort, which I think I am pretty safe in saying is his moment of victory for the World Championship of 1965. 5 races, 5 wins, a total of 45 marks, but then remember that only the 5 best performances count. 4 races to go. As I told you again, Graham Hill would have to win all those 4, and Jimmy would not have to figure in them for Graham to wrest the World Championship for him, even in this 11th hour, well, 11 3/4 hour. On the other hand, last year, of course, John Surtees came forward to win the World Championship very late on, with his victory at the German Grand Prix, but Surtees this time is pretty well outclassed. He's fourth in the championship at this time. But now we can quickly tot up the score. Jim Clark, 45 points. Second, Jackie Stewart with 6 to add to his 19, making him 25 points. Third was Dan Gurney, but he's only got 1, so he gets 5. Now Graham Hill, finishing fourth, gets 3 points, making him 26. So on total score, he is still just ahead of his teammate, Jackie Stewart, and second in the World Championship.